Hey, Catching Up to Fi listeners, I have a great surprise for you. On today's episode, we talk with Stephen and David Baughier, and Stephen is the head of CampFI, as many of you know. He wants to invite us, our tribe, to CampFI Southwest, which is October 4th through 7th in Julian, California. You can go to campfi.org, that's campfi.org, to sign up, and at checkout, use our promo discount code of Catching Up. That's CATHINGUP, Catching Up. And when you check out, you'll get a 10% discount. We hope you enjoy this show. You'll be hearing a lot about CampFI, so you'll understand what it is. Take care and enjoy this episode.
I was like, what, 12 or 13, Stephen, maybe? I don't know, but we had some money. And I walked up to the counter and said, I want to buy one of those Nintendos, and it was a couple $100 maybe. And the lady was like, where's your parent? I was like, I don't need a parent, I got money. And so the feeling of having money and being able to, at that young age, like deal with, at that time, a large sum of money, I guess it probably made it interesting to me versus what most kids at that age probably don't experience. One, making it, working for it, saving it, and then exchanging it for something of value. After CampFI gone back to their hometown, either they had the numbers squared away and they just needed that push to pull the trigger to retire, or they go back and start their business, or they go back and take these ideas and have a conversation with their spouse. And next thing you know, the next year or later that year, they're bringing their spouse to these events. And that's the kind of, you say synergy earlier about me and Stephen, but these synergy about these events is significant. And I can't advocate that people attend one of these enough.
The co-housing community is a natural progression for people who reach early retirement. It's like we all know about retirement communities. I think Villages is a huge one in Florida, and there's others. But so this would be like an early retirement community, or a FIRE community. So to me, I was introduced to the idea of co-housing in that 2016 breakout session at Camp Mustache. And then I came home, I was excited about the idea, purchased a few books, did a little bit of reading. I was like, that would be really cool to be able to bring a co-housing community to Georgia, to my hometown.
Welcome to Catching Up to Fi, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to Fi. I'm Bill Yount with Jackie Cummins-Koski, and we are here today with twins. This is our first twin episode. This may be the month of twins, because we're recording with the Wealth twins later this month. So we're going to get the opinions of a couple of guys that are super involved in our community and run a little bit in the background, but are connectors and communicators that we wanted to get their stories and the things they're doing in the community to bring everybody together. Jackie, would you introduce our guests?
Yeah, well, I think just about everybody in the FI community knows David and Stephen Baughier. I mean, they're pretty awesome. They are inspiring identical twin brothers. Identical. I can barely tell them apart. And so we decided to have them on the show at the same time so that we could prove that it's not just one person, it's actually two of them. So this is one that you definitely want to take a look at the YouTube so you can see how much these guys still look alike in their mid-40s. So yeah, they do have a lot in common, but one of the biggest things is their impact that they've made on the FI community. They are connectors and community builders. And I consider them sort of like the matching centerpieces of like the modern FI movement. And they'd rather see others in the spotlight over themselves. So David is retired from the Navy after 20 years of service. He is founder of Fiology, and that's defined as the study of financial independence. His Fiology online course and workbook are well-designed and resources to teach others about financial independence. He's also host of the new podcast and YouTube channel, it's awesome, called Forget About Money, where he refereed that infamous debate between the investment gurus, Paul Merriman, and our favorite, Jael Collins. And I bet that was a lot of fun to do. Now, Stephen, his twin brother, is a former accountant who also served in the military and is founder of CampFI. We talk about CampFI all the time, and we're all repping our CampFI shirts. It's a money camp for adults, and it's held multiple places throughout the country at different times during the year. So the first time I ever went camping was at a CampFI in Virginia in 2018. And I know it's crazy that I was freaking in my 40s and went to my first camping experience, but it was a great one. And it is often people's first in-person FI event. So if you see those, they'll talk a little bit more about it, but that is a great entryway into doing something in person. He's also the genius behind a growing co-housing community aligned with the FIRE movement that he started in 2016. It's called EAGLE Co-housing, which stands for Efficient and Generous Living Environment. Isn't he cute? That's a great name. But the fun fact, though, about Stephen is that he ran for mayor of his city in 2021. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. So, guys, we got a lot to talk about. But first, David and Stephen, thank you for your service. And welcome to Catching Up to FI.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate that you were on my podcast. You were one of my first few guests, and I think we're up like 20 plus episodes now, but we've got 2 of those episodes are yours. So thank you for being a good friend and shining the light in the financial independence community for all that you do.
Yeah, you really know who your friends are. It's like I had no idea how that book would do or whatever, but as soon as you saw me post it, you're like, hey, you want to come on the podcast? I'm like, now, that's a friend right there. So that's awesome. And Stephen, how you doing over there?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
All right. See, you guys, I can barely tell you apart, but I've got a little sticky note to say which one is which. So hopefully we don't screw that up.
Well, they both part their hair on the same side, so it does make it a little bit difficult. At any rate, we want to know about what it was like growing up as twins and sort of the money memories that left you getting on the path relatively early in life. We're about late starters, but we all start at some point, and you guys got a little bit of an earlier start, had your foibles and mistakes along the way. Give us a little bit of your Genesis stories, please. How about Stephen first?
Yeah, so growing up, we're just like most other kids. When we got to around 14, 15 years old, we started working part-time after school and on weekends. And we pretty much did that throughout high school. And all those years, really, the only money thing that I think I ever remember either of our parents telling us was save 50%. And it was mainly our dad. He would say, save 50%. And so we did that. And he was never like a micromanager about our finances or anything like that. So we just pretty much did what he told us. And then, so that's really like pretty much all of the financial advice that I think that were parented, unless David can think of anything else.
I just remember we worked in a restaurant in our early teens and our mid-teens. And on Friday afternoon, we would get our paycheck and we would go into the office at the restaurant, and the owner would basically cash, I'm not sure how legal this was, but they would basically cash our paychecks, and then we would take that cash back home. And I just remember our dad would be like, okay, put 80% on the counter, you keep 20%. And then like the next day, that next Saturday morning, he would take that 80% and go put it in our bank account at the local bank.
Okay, so 80%?
That's what I remember, yes. And so
wow, that's a lot.
At a very early age, we had a lot of savings. I remember being like 16 years old and having enough money to go buy at the time, when stereos took up like half a room, I would go, I think I spent like $1,100 or something like this on this stereo with like big speakers and everything. So I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't save that much money, of course. And also one of my earlier memories is I think I saved a couple $100, and I'm not sure if it was a Nintendo, Stephen, a Super Nintendo or something, but I remember going to a Zayre, which was I don't know if they still have Zayre. I don't think they even have them anymore, but it's like a Kmart. And walking in as a kid, I think I was like, 12 or 13, Stephen, maybe, I don't know, but we had some money. And I walked up to the counter and said, I want to buy one of those Nintendos, and it was a couple $100 maybe. And the lady was like, where's your parent? I was like, I don't need a parent, I got money. And so the feeling of having money and being able to, at that young age, like deal with, at that time, a large sum of money. I guess it probably made it interesting to me versus what most kids at that age probably don't experience. One, making it, working for it, saving it, and then exchanging it for something of value that you want at that age. And it'd be mostly like, it wasn't from like a grandparent's birthday money. It wasn't from, allowance. It was from your own work. So I think that probably had a big impact on the thought processes of, okay, I can earn money and then that I can exchange that money for something of value later, whether it be investing or actual things.
So guys, is it just me, or does 80% sound like a lot being saved? Like, so when you were growing up and your dad made you save 80%, were the other kids around you, were their parents making them do the same thing, or you were just like the anomaly?
Well, I don't remember. We were always too busy to be hanging out with a bunch of other kids around us, I think. So
it's the beauty of having a twin brother. You always got a close friend.
That's a good point. Yeah. We were out there working together at the restaurant. So
Wow.
When did you guys actually then, you were buying things with your money, did you start investing early too? Did somebody bring that into your repertoire?
no, I do not think so. I don't remember anything like that. So we graduated high school, went to the military, and as in our early 20s, we were always interested in money. We would read the Susie Orman books and Rick Edelman and Rich Dad Poor Dad and those things. And so we knew about these accounts, 401ks, IRAs, things like that. But honestly, I didn't start like investing in them until way later.
Well, what's interesting to me is I have twins as well. And I have a very different experience with twins because I have one on the frugal to spendthrift spectrum. I have one way on the frugal side and one on the spendthrift side. And you guys were synergistic all along the way. Is this something that you just absolutely did together and bounced off of each other?
I don't think so. I think it's just like any two people. You have your similarities and your differences. And I think you're more like to be, if you're an identical twin, I think the chances that you're going to be similar and have similar interests to that person is higher. It might not be that case with your twins, but in our case, we both were fairly aligned with how we thought about money, general outlook on the world, views, and things like that. So I think it was natural that we both gravitated towards educating ourselves about finance and beginning to implement some of that education earlier on in our adulthood.
Well, what's interesting too is you started with this 50% or 80% savings rate. Did you maintain that through your 20s and 30s and 40s? Is that something that just stuck with you?
No, sir.
Oh,
Now that's a military guy, right? Look, that's either a military guy or a Southern guy, and I believe you guys are both.
We are.
Saying, yes, sir.
All right. So our audience is interested in not only savings rates, but they are in later in life at their peak income years. Can you give us a little bit of an idea where your income peaked out and what your savings rates were at that time and how long it took you at those savings rates to get to FI?
So I was fairly clumsy, I believe. At that point in my life, in my mid-20s, at that time, I was commissioned as an officer, so I was getting a decent income. And when I say decent, I can't remember exactly, but it was probably at that time, 2002 to 2008-ish. That time frame is probably ranged between like $50,000 and $75,000 a year. And I would contribute to my thrift savings plan, which is similar to a 401k in the civilian sector. We have our low-cost index funds that you can invest in. But I don't think I maxed out every year. I don't think I maxed out my Roth every year. I think I was contributing some to each along the way, but it was, I don't want to say haphazard, but like I was living life in my 20s. I had a very, very busy job. So I didn't really put a whole lot of emphasis on optimizing my finances. As a 20-something, you're going out. I was working a lot. So when I did go out, it would be like downtown San Diego, and which isn't cheap, wasn't cheap then, it's not cheap now. And it just wasn't, I wasn't dialed in. However, throughout my 20s, I made a couple of mistakes, investing mistakes, and then finding the financial independence community later, it kind of solidified it a lot. So when you ask me what my savings rate is, I don't think I've ever once calculated my savings rate as far as the shockingly simple math and how many years to get to financial independence. I don't think I've ever calculated it. But what I did do once I started finding my groove in finance was be more aggressive and assertive as far as funneling my money into assets that actually grow. So whether that's a habit of maxing out thrift savings plan or the 401k equivalent, or buying rental properties, or maximizing your Roth, or whatever that is, those are the kind of things I started just assertively maxing out. I didn't really do anything above and beyond that, and it still worked out okay.
You mentioned mistakes you made, and I heard about this in another podcast, and they were some pretty big ones early on that you learned from and obviously didn't do again. But can you tell us a little bit what you did in your thrift savings plan around the time of the downturn or whenever that was?
Sure, that's one of a few major mistakes I've made, but I think it was I had just gone on deployment. No, I got picked up to be an individual augmentee, which is basically at that time the Army was short on leadership, so they borrowed from other services to plug in to their Middle East type stuff. So I spent a year in Baghdad, and prior to that, we all know what happened in 07, 08, but that's the same time that coincided. Now, if I go on deployment, or a military member goes on deployment, that their income is tax exempt. So it's a great opportunity to save, especially if you're able to like stop a lease back home, still get BA, however it is. You can manipulate your finances in some way, as long as it's not dishonest. You can really take advantage of being on a deployment. Well, at the time, the economy was suspect, as we all know, and I thought I made a good move by getting completely out of my stock funds and my thrift savings plan and putting it all into the G fund, which is the government securities fund. And at that time, I was probably making 2 or 3%. So, but I survived the downturn. And we're not talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars here. I think I only had like 40-something thousand dollars in that account at the time. But it's still indicative of a mistake of attempting to time the market. Well, I was able to avoid the downside in my thrift savings plan. However, it took a year and a half, 2 years for me to get back in. So I missed that whole growth. So it was interesting too, because at the time I had people knew me even at that time as like a money person that they can come bounce their ideas off of. And I remember specifically the civilian that I was working with actually it was just before my deployment. And she was showing me her thrift savings plan. And she's like, hey, what do you think about this? And I was like, just stay the course, just keep contributing. And from what I understand, she actually did do that. And she ended up doing great years later. Whereas I didn't follow my own advice, and I did not catch that bottom, or at least some of the gains that I would have got if I'd have stayed in the stock funds throughout that downturn. So that was a significant error on my part.
All right, Stephen, you're an accountant by trade. Did that make you better with money? And what did your 20s look like? Did you get it better than your brother did? Did you make some of the same mistakes? How did that roll forward for you?
My 20s looked like this. I got out of the Navy around, I was probably 22, 23 years old. Went back to school, finished getting my degree, my accounting degree. About that same time, maybe a year or two later, I finished it out. Started working some local CPA firms. And then I got married at 26 or 27. And then, so I really wasn't, like, even all throughout my 20s, I had a kid a year later, another kid 3 years later. I wasn't worried about my, like, saving at that point, all throughout my 20s. I knew I should be doing it. I knew that we were spending way more than I was comfortable spending on things. But the whole happy wife, happy life thing, whatever. So that's kind of got me a little bit. So we really didn't focus on a lot of savings all the way through 20s. My income wasn't great. I was still young. It takes a while for some people to develop, I guess, their clientele in accounting and kind of break in, especially on a local level. It wasn't a case where I went and worked like on a huge like firm in Atlanta or anything like that. So it was tough. And there was even a few layoffs. I remember losing my job a couple times. So it wasn't smooth all the way through my 20s. I'm trying to think of when I actually started saving. So you said a lot of your listeners are kind of a little bit older in their late 30s, 40s, and 50s, and they feel like they're behind. Like I wasn't as far off as probably some people assume just because I'm the CampFI guy. So I was probably in my mid 30s. Divorce happened probably mid 30. I think I was 36 years old. And that's whenever, at that point, and I'm 46 now. So this was just 10 years ago. That's whenever I was started taking control of spending the way I wanted to spend, investing the way I thought I should invest, and just kind of shaping my lifestyle 100% consistent with me and what I want. So that's at that point that I actually started accumulating in my 401k.
That's really interesting, Stephen, because I have a similar story. Got divorced in my mid-30s, and that's what woke me up. And that's when I started saving and investing and all of that. So it's just kind of cool to know, because I didn't know that about you. So even in your mid-30s, I mean, it took you about 10 years to kind of get where you are today. So yeah. I heard both of you guys talk about the military, and I mentioned it in your introduction. So I'm curious, whose idea was it to join the military, and did you join at the same time?
All right, you want me to take this?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, I'll try to make it quick. So we were high school, had good grades, tested really high on everything. And of course, whenever you take an ASVAB, which is the military assessment, I forget what it stands for, Armed Services, Vocational Aptitude, something. So we scored high on that. Immediately, anybody, if you had a kid that's in high school, or if you were in high school and you took it, your phone starts ringing right away. Recruiters are hitting you up. So my dad, our dad, was retired military, Air Force. And he never really pushed us that much, but he wanted us to look into the option. And so we had recruiters coming to the house, and one recruiter just gave us a whole lot of lies, and we were like, that sounds great. So we did it. And then while we were in boot camp.
What kind of lies did he tell you?
Well, we'll get into that. But when we were in boot camp, that's when we realized, like, oh, what that guy said was not the way it is. And so we talked, but we were in. So the recruiter did his job, I guess. So we did have military, like our dad was military. And so I don't know how much that probably played into like us kind of wanting to go that route. But yeah, that's how we did it. A Navy guy came and said specifically some Air Force ROTC benefits were in excess of the reality. And so once we got learning more about it, we had already signed. And once we found out that they didn't pay as much as he'd said that they would pay, then it was done. We were in.
I'm just curious. So do you remember what they paid you back then? Do you remember?
So I think some of the programs have changed a little bit now. But for us, David, correct me if I'm wrong, for us, ROTC, they pay for tuition and fees. I think they pay for books, and they give you a stipend. If I remember right, it was like maybe $200 a month at the time. And that was it, pretty much. And you would do your drills. You would just report to your military classes every week. And then during the summer, you would do 2 weeks as a midshipman. They would assign you to a military base or a ship for a couple weeks and get some training like that all throughout college. So 4 years of college. And whenever you get done, you get a degree and you get a commission. So you have a nice job as an officer. So, but what they promised us was all that plus like active duty pay for an E3 level. Something like that.
E5. They promised that we would get a basic pay of an E5 while we were going to college. And that's turned out to be false.
So the E3, E5, that's just your rank in the military?
Correct.
Okay. And you didn't get
you start out E1, work your way up. No, so they said, yeah, as a part of the scholarship, you get basically a full-time check. And that didn't happen. So, I mean, that was a crazy deal, right? Like, how could you say no to that? But we just didn't know any better.
Hey, listeners, we are excited to have Delete Me as a new sponsor of our podcast. Did you know that your personal identifying information is found all over the internet and that data brokers sell it? Things like address, phone number, name, and many other things are on there, and we need to have them off. The risks of having your personal information on display are almost innumerable, but here are a few. Number one, you risk being harassed or attacked because of your publicly expressed views, opinions, profession, etc. Number two, you risk identity theft and becoming the victim of many of the phishing scams we have talked about on our shows with Paula Pant, episode 66, Scam-A-Lot, and retired FBI agent Donna Peterson, episode 78, CyberFi and the FBI. As you know from my story, my identity was stolen. My financial institutions were accessed. And once stolen, you really can't get the privacy of your identity back and are on the defensive forever. Number three, you risk being stalked. This happened to a blogger friend of mine. Did you know that you really have a right to privacy? But how do we fight back? I choose to place my trust in a product called Delete Me. It's a hands-free online subscription service that removes your personally identifiable information from being sold online. Delete Me privacy experts remove you from hundreds of data brokers year-round. 7 days after you sign up, you get your first privacy report. Here is a screenshot of my dashboard. As you can see, they've looked at 84 total data brokers, they've looked at 4,477 listings, and they've had 57 data brokers with my information on them. So it's a comprehensive service that I use year-round. And they continue to monitor all of these sites and continue to route my personal identifiable information as it gets resold again. So how do you join me in protecting your personal identifiable information? Simple. Go to joindeleteme.com/catching-up and use promo code catching-up at checkout, and you'll get 20% off of U.S. consumer plans. They also have family plans. That is joindeleteme.com/catching-up and use promo code catching-up. Protect yourself like I do. You'll sleep better at night. Thank you, Delete Me, for sponsoring our show. I love your product and I recommend it to our audience wholeheartedly. Well, you use the military for your educational purposes, and then there's other things involved there, like their pension, your TSP, and then real estate. David, you used sort of a trifecta approach to retirement, and both of you managed to retire early. Can you tell us a little bit about your portfolios, how you managed to retire early, and then maybe what percentage of your income from each aspect of your portfolio do you use for your expenses these days?
So in my accumulation phase, which was roughly 20 years plus a few years probably, I would contribute to my thrift savings plan. I would contribute to my Roth. And in 2011, so that was the stock, like index fund type of portfolio building. What I would consider what should be the foundation of everybody's retirement planning. And then in 2011, I started purchasing rental properties in our hometown of Warner Robins in Middle Georgia. Even though I was in the military, I have Stephen there. I've got a few other people there that would help me if I needed it. So I had an advantage and I was familiar with that rental market. So that's where I started purchasing properties. So that went from roughly 2011 till now. And again, I don't remember thinking I need to put this percentage of my overall portfolio into real estate, this percentage of my portfolio into index funds or brokerage or individual stocks or anything like that. But it's kind of just, like I said earlier, just invest in things that I have a high probability of panning out in the future. So on top of those two things, military does provide a pension at 20 years of service, and that's 50% of your basic income. So for me, right now, that's about, after taxes, I think it's right at $4,000, maybe a little bit, maybe $4,200 or $4,300 a month. And then I do get a level of disability, which is another $1,700 or $1,800 a month. And for my rental properties, I believe it's just over $2,000 a month rental income. Now that's gross. So they are paid off properties. They don't have any liens on them, so I don't have any outflow other than maintenance, taxes, insurance, those kinds of things. But it has done well for me since I currently live in a very high cost of living area of Southern California, San Diego, and I'm still doing okay. So I've been retired for 3 years in a high cost of living area, and those are the basically three things that I've used to position myself to be able to do that. I have not drawn down at all on my thrift savings plan, or I've since done some shuffling around with finance, so I don't have any Roth anymore, but I do have a brokerage account. So I continuously still invest in my brokerage account every month, and I'm still able to live. So far so good, and that's kind of where I'm at right now.
And then Stephen, how does it look like for you? Because you retired as well, and did you proceed with a more traditional retirement? Are you in drawdown phase? Do you have real estate? How does it look for you?
So I am actually not retired. I am not financially independent. As I said earlier, I really didn't get started until 36, 37 years old. At the divorce, that's whenever I started to be able to put a lot more money into my 401k because I downsized into a smaller house. My cost of living decreased a great deal. And so probably a few years later, so that was 2013, probably 2016, here I'm a single guy, well, divorced. I have my kids for the week every other week. And my cost of living is really low. So at that time, my kids are young. I just prioritize my time with them. So I knew if I was able to pay my bills and I can be available for them, taking them to school, pick them up, because they don't live in my district. I moved to a district that's different than the one that they were started out in. So the bus doesn't come and pick them up. So I can take them to school, pick them up. And at the time they were 7 and 4. And then, so I was just like, I found Phi. I think it gave me a whole lot of optimism that there is a number that I can work towards. And once I get to that, that's fine. Defining enough is huge. It just gave me a lot of optimism. It said I can even scale back working a little bit. So what I did was I quit my job. I was an accountant for Northrop Grumman as defense contractor here in Warner Robins. I quit my job in middle of 2016, which is July 2016. And then I was just going to free up my time and see how my calendar filled. But I knew that I would be available and for the kids. I had no idea even at that time, like I was going to end up doing CampFIs or being part of this Phi community or anything like that. If you want numbers, at that point, I think I had 50,000 in my 401k. Like this wasn't a thing where we would, I remember I told you before, we'd spend a lot of money. And we just weren't saving it. So I had like 50,000. I say only, that's a lot of money. But whenever I quit my job, I think I transferred 50,000 from my work 401k over into a traditional IRA at Vanguard. And that's just kind of been riding. Now, my mindset at that point is I'm just going to be available. If something fun comes along that pays money, great. And that was for the rest of the year. And then I knew the following year was tax season. I had plenty of accounting friends. So this guy, Jeb, he was grateful enough to offer me to work for him for tax season. So I knew that I could work tax seasons, probably make enough money to pay all the bills for the year. And then just whatever happens after tax season throughout the rest of the year is cool. I'm home for the summers with the kids and I'm free to do whatever during the fall. That was my plan. So I did that for 2017. Then I ended up, that January 2017 is when I did my first CampFI. That was a complete passion project, no income motive at all. We had 38 people show up. I think we were to the good financially on that, like $600. So, but that was such a hit that like it kept going, like we kept doing camps, and this turned into a way for me to pay my bills. And I'm still able to make, and I do some other things as well, but that's the main thing to kind of keep the lights on. I know this is a long answer, but I'm trying to like set a lot of things straight here.
Yeah.
So I'm not at financial independence. I'm just like probably so many of your listeners. I'm just working my way to it best I can every day, but trying to balance relationships with the kids and getting the dishes done and getting the yard work done and doing whatever. Life happens. And so, yeah, but I've been able to continue to contribute. Like I've since opened a SEP IRA, a solo 401k, a traditional, I told you that traditional IRA that I had rolled over. I've been able to contribute every year to that as well. So even though at the time that I quit my job, I was willing to just like, even just go down to zero by the time my kids were 18, because I knew I could always go back to work. It hasn't happened. My net worth has increased from, say, I think approximately 50 grand to a little under 300 right now. So that's in the last 8 years.
Wow, I think that's a healthy attitude. And so, David, do you ever call up Stephen and say, "Oh man, is that what you working stiffs do? You know, now that you're retired and he's not."
Oh wait, I'm sure there is some banter that goes back and forth. Like last week, I think.
Yeah, and that happens sometimes with my friends. Like if we're having lunch, they're like looking at their watch and be like, "Yeah, I got to go back at 1:30." I'm like, "Oh man, I forgot about that. You guys still clocking yourselves for lunch."
So that's
yeah.
interesting. That's interesting. You're still working as an accountant, are you?
Yes, I have up until now. I've worked as an independent contractor with the CPA firm here for the last few years. And just last week, I kind of put in my notice and told them if they want me next tax season, that's fine. I have a lot of balls in the air and I'm trying to let go of that one for a while and focus on some of the other things that I have going on.
Now, do you have real estate as well, or is CampFI your main source of income?
For a while, I did have a rental property. My ex-wife and I had purchased a property, let a friend rent from us for a while. After the divorce and everything, I ended up selling that. So currently, I have no rental properties.
Okay, you mentioned CampFI. Our audience may not have heard of it. They've heard that it exists and you should go. And we hear that the genesis started back in 2016, 2017. Can you take us through what your idea was then, where it came from, and then where has it evolved to?
Okay. We attended, David and I, and a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, we all attended Camp Mustache in 2016, which Camp Mustache is a weekend retreat up in the Pacific Northwest for followers of the Mr. Money Mustache blog. And so we went to that, thought it was a great experience. I asked the original organizers of that camp, can I do a Camp Mustache down in the Southeast? Because I was down here at that time, I felt like I didn't know anybody who was into this sort of thing. Like really, that's how I felt. So disconnected from everything. And so being up there and being around those people felt so good. I was like, maybe there's other people in the Southeast in Georgia who feel the same way. So let's bring Camp Mustache down here. So in January of 2017, we did a Camp Mustache Southeast. And we had 38 people come down. David was there. And it was just a good time. And so that's how I got into it. Up until that point, I've never done any sort of event planning or hosting or anything like that. It's very nerve-wracking, very, very scary for me. And I know this lighting is crazy, so if you're on YouTube listening, I apologize. But it was very scary, but I did it. And it was fun and it was very fulfilling. And a lot of people seem to get a lot of value out of it. So I remember in September of that year, same year, later that year, Jonathan Mendonza from the CUtFI podcast called me and he's like, you need to do these everywhere. He's just like, I know you guys know Jonathan, but if you've listened to the CUtFI podcast when Jonathan was on it, he's a fast talker, high energy, and it's just like, he got me so excited. I think I slept like 10 minutes that night. So it was crazy. So at that point I realized, like, if this is important enough for me to stay awake and be excited about it all night, I'm going to go ahead and try my hand at expanding these things. So we wanted to make CampFIs available as accessible as we could. So I say I guess, but open up. We ended up creating CampFIs all throughout the country at different regions. So Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, Southwest, Texas. Texas is a region. And then the Rocky Mountains. So that's kind of where we have them all throughout the year. And it's been a really good time over the years. We've done this past weekend. We just had one in Virginia. We had a record number of people at 114. And that was the 45th camp that I've run.
45th, huh?
45, yeah.
That is something to be proud of. Bill, you've gone to one, I've gone to one, and like I said, it was my first camping experience. And I just remember, I can't remember which one of you guys it was. I don't know if it was David or Stephen, but I remember it was my very first in-person FI event. And I didn't know anybody, whatever. And it was one day around lunch, and I'm sort of standing around, and this tall guy comes next to me. He's kind of handsome. And he says, I haven't met you yet here. And I'm like, what? And I think it was you, Stephen. Hopefully you weren't married at the time, but
thanks, Jack. You see what happened?
But I just remember you made me feel very special. Like your goal was to chat one-on-one with every person at the camp. And so I felt special, and I'm sure everyone else that you made sure you made a one-on-one personal connection with felt very special. Now, I know it's all big now. You probably can't do that, but that really made my first experience a good one. And of course, I came back the following year, and I support what you did. And that's why I'm just amazed, and I'm so happy for you that CampFI has grown so big, and how many lives you've touched by people being able to connect at your camp. So, I mean, kudos to you. It's amazing.
Well, how many people have actually attended now total in 45 CampFIs?
I haven't kept track of, a lot of people repeat and come back and come back. Sometimes people come multiple times a year. Sometimes people come back every year. So I haven't filtered it down to just different people. But you figure average 60 people a camp, 50, 60 people a camp, 55 times 45. So all these math
You're
people,
the accountant.
I don't know what
You can't do math. You're the accountant. It would be conservative. Thousands have attended throughout since you've began.
So I'm sure it's
really
between 2,000 and 3,000.
Wow. That make you jealous, David? I'm just kidding.
No, I think it's amazing, especially once you go.
I'm just kidding.
And if somebody's listening to this and they go to one, their own life will be changed. And this is not hyperbole.
Yeah.
Their own life will be changed. Their perspective completely changes because you realize you're not the only one that sees the world the way you do. especially when it comes to balancing life and finance and lifestyle. And with this community, I mean, I can think back, and I haven't gone to maybe, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 CampFIs, but just even in those limited events that I have personal experience with, I know of people who have changed their life. They've gone after a CampFI, gone back to their hometown. Either they had the numbers squared away and they just needed that push to pull the trigger to retire, or they go back and start their business, or they go back and take these ideas and have a conversation with their spouse. And next thing you know, the next year or later that year, they're bringing their spouse to these events. And that's the kind of, you say synergy earlier about me and Stephen, but these synergy about these events is significant. And I can't advocate that people attend one of these enough.
Now that's a twin brother right there.
We need to know a little bit about what to expect when you go to a CampFI. Let's look at what you offer both academically, but then socially and from an event planning standpoint. What does it look like so our audience becomes interested in going?
So the event it starts on Friday. Most attendees will arrive on Friday, and they'll get their name tag, they'll figure out their room assignment. And it's, when you buy a CampFI ticket, you're purchasing food, lodging. I think the only thing it doesn't cover is transportation, like airfare or taxi to the actual site. So food's covered, lodging is covered. Sometimes, almost every time, people will bring in additional snacks and adult beverages to share. That's always a good time. So Friday, it's very interesting to see, because you'll show up and it'll be a couple trickle in early. And then next thing you know, like clockwork, you can tell the volume of the energy of the room. Like, people don't know each other. And like within 45 minutes, it seems like now the volume is like huge, like loud, because everyone's like finally talking. And it's amazing to see how quickly people become comfortable around each other and just talking and having a good time. So Friday is a lot of that. There'll be a meal for dinner, and then there's a bonding experience where people get to meet people, introduce each other, do some kind of name game where we try to gain some kind of familiarity with each other. And then it's just relaxing for the rest of the night. Saturday and Sunday are very similar to Saturday and Sunday, not to Friday night. But you have 3 meals, and in between the meals, you usually have 1, maybe 2 formal talks. When I say formal talks, I mean a 20-minute presentation, usually by, it could be a well-known name in the space. It could be Jackie. It could be, I think Stephen's given a talk at, maybe not CampFI. Stephen, have you ever spoken at one of your own CampFIs?
I've never spoken at a CampFI.
He's spoken at other people's events. But usually it's someone who comes with a semi-prepared talk to give to the group. And usually the group is about between 40 and 70 people, depending on the venue, whatever they can support. And I believe most of the events do sell out. So you have people who come in, give a quick, informal 20-minute presentation. It's usually very enlightening and insightful. And then the cameras stop rolling, and that's when people can then ask their more intimate, maybe harder questions for discussion for the remaining of the hour. And sprinkled throughout Saturday and Sunday are, again, depending on the venue, certain events might be provided, like archery or canoeing or wall climbing, zip lining. That's not guaranteed at every single CampFI, but you'll know that whenever you go buy a ticket, what's offered for that particular the venue. So that's Saturday and Sunday, and the whole time you're just feeling more and more connected with the people who are attending. And then Monday morning is kind of, some people have to get up early to go get flights, but it's a leisurely morning. Get up, if you know, some people get up early to go do walk or go to yoga. It's completely on their own. But throughout that morning, maybe I say 50% is probably gone by like 9:30, and then the rest of the people stick around, kind of just, usually that the local people who don't have to catch a flight, and they'll just get phone numbers, chit chat, help clean up the venue, and depart. And then next thing you know, you've got 50 more people in the CampFI Facebook group chatting up what a good time they had and things that they've learned, and it's a really, really cool experience.
And then, Stephen, there's also something else I believe that I experienced when I was there. There's these breakout sessions. Can you tell us a little bit about those? Because those are attendee-led, right?
Right. David, you did a great job summarizing the weekend there. Good job. Thank you. Yes. So, like he said, Saturday and Sundays, we have between breakfast and lunch, we'll have our formal talks. And usually after lunch for about an hour and a half or so before the recreation free time starts, we'll do breakout sessions. And so what those are just like you said, attendee-led, informal discussions. So those are determined by, we'll do a vote. We'll have before lunch, usually on Saturday, I'll ask people to nominate hey, give me 8 to 10 topics that you're interested in talking about for breakout sessions. So we go through that as a group, and then we'll do votes. And so the top 4 vote getters are the 4 talks that are discussed throughout the weekend. We'll do 2 on Saturday afternoon, usually 2 on Sunday afternoon, and they're done at the same time. So you have to pick which one you want to go to. But if you came with a friend or a partner, then they can attend the other one and take good notes for you, and you can do the same for them. But that's how it's done. So no, there's not any person standing in front of the room talking at a group. It's just people usually create a circle of chairs, hang out, and they talk about travel hacking. Yeah, I got a trip coming up. Is there a way I can travel hack that? Or healthcare. Healthcare is a big thing for people whenever they leave their jobs because their health is typically attached to their workplace. So a lot of people have interest in getting a lot of their questions answered. How do people who are retired early before they get Medicare age, how do they cover healthcare? So that's a really popular topic too. So just things like that. It's super informal, just people hanging out, sharing information for an hour, hour and a half before they get ready to go and kayak or walk or play basketball or whatever it is that they're going to do during their free time for the rest of the afternoon until dinner.
Hey, Catching Up to Fi audience, this is Bill Young telling you that we have some great sponsors here on our show these days. Jeremy Schneider, who's been on the show and is the founder of Personal Finance Club, has created a couple of great courses that he is giving to our audience at a $30 discount. Click on the link in the show notes to get this deal, and you can have the course, How to Money Like a Millionaire, which normally is $99, but you can get it for $69 using the code CUTOFI if you click on the link in our show notes. The other course that he does is called Build Wealth by Investing in Index Funds. And again, this course is only $99 normally, and it's such a great value already, but you can get $30 off and pay $69 for this course as well. Now, why not take them both? Buy his Ultimate Personal Finance Bundle, which again is normally $149, but you get $30 off the bundle if you use the code CUTOFI. Go to the show notes and find the link for these courses and get started on your personal finance journey.
So, Stephen, I'm curious, over the years, how many years have you been doing CampFI now? 6, 7 years?
January 17, I did one. Didn't do anything more after that. CampFI is kind of when I rebranded in January 18. So we'll just say January 17. So about 7.5 years now.
Yeah, I'm just curious, has the topics changed, like these attendee-led sessions? Have the topics changed? It sounds like health insurance has been a consistent one this whole time. Have you seen the topics change, or what are some of the other hot topics that people are very, very interested in talking about in a breakout session?
Yeah, they have changed a little bit. I know David's going to chime in here in a minute if I don't say what he is thinking, but I will say that I do think it's changed. We do have some, like travel hacking is always one, healthcare is usually one, but one thing that we used to have a lot of that we don't see a lot now is real estate. For whatever reason, the people who come to camps are really not that into real estate. Maybe it's because they're further along in their journey. Typically, I don't know. Side hustle is still one that people want to talk about. Side hustles, entrepreneurship is still pretty strong. But another one that we're getting a lot, pretty much, it's almost like the highest vote getter every time we do a camp, is the life after FI. So either, again, maybe it's because the people kind of skew a little further along. I don't want to discourage anybody who's just starting out. You can get a lot of value from a camp. Definitely go pick the brains for people who have been there, done that for sure. It's going to help you a lot. But for whatever reason, maybe the ages are getting people are getting a little further along, which is a good thing, but they're getting closer to that time where they're going to pull the plug, or they already have.
Pull the plug.
And pull the plug. I don't know, on retirement. Is that pull? People say pull the trigger. That always gets me. I don't like the pull the trigger thing.
Switch, pull the
So I
trigger,
also
pull
say
the
pull the
plug.
plug. Either way, pull something. Retire early.
Make the leap.
There you go. Make the leap. And so yeah, that's the thing. Is like they call it Typically, it's Life After Phi is the name of it, but it's almost like Life When You Get Phi, I guess, should be the accurate way. But that's probably the number one for the last year and a half.
Well, what's interesting too is people bring their numbers sometimes too. And people have had discussions one-on-one with people like JL Collins that used to go to this, or Mr. Money Mustache, or some of the creators, the people that have achieved it. And they get to figure out that where am I in my journey and can I make the leap? And people have, after sharing their numbers with people that are aware of what you need to do, said, I have the confidence to do it, right? And then the other thing that I found really interesting was there's a lot of introverts in our community that worry about going to things like this. You can't be an introvert very long at one of these camps, right?
Well, I think you discover that people are attracted to like. And while there is a good amount of, well, I'll just say there's a good amount of diversity. I don't know that that's absolutely true at many of these events, but as far as introvert and extrovert, if they're, for the sake of this conversation, we're saying that many of the people who are on their financial independence or who are attracted to financial independence are introverts, and then they go to these events. The similarities that bring us to these CampFIs are what connects us quickly to when we show up. And so that's why the volume of the room goes from like nearly crickets or just walking around and, figuring out like what's going on, where your room is, to one room with 40 plus people and you can barely hear yourself think because so much great conversation is happening. So if you are an introvert and you're like, okay, I don't know if I want to go because I've never been with a bunch of strangers over 2.5 days or 3 days, then just be confident that whatever you might be thinking as far as you'll be uncomfortable, just trust that will not be a factor, I don't believe, and it hasn't been for anybody that I've seen actually at a CampFI. Most people leave, one, if they're introverts, probably leave pretty tired because there's a lot of interaction, or can be, but there is also plenty of opportunities to go be by yourself if you need to step away from all the action too. Stephen doesn't force anybody to attend any of these talks, that formal or informal. It's your weekend. You're just there to connect and get out of it what you want to get out of it.
All right. So this is one of the aspects that you guys do for the community. There's a lot of synergy between the two of you because, David, you have an education degree, and you've used that education degree to start another aspect of education in Phi, something called Fiology.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
We want to hear a little bit about that, its origins, and what it offers, in particular, our community, because this is a free resource and its breadth is pretty incredible. I've actually got your Fiology workbook right here. And it's not only a workbook, I believe it's 52 lessons that you take people through. Tell us a little bit about Fiology, how it started, and what you offer communities like our late starters that want to know, what is a checklist of things I need to do?
Sure. So I think both Stephen and I were fairly inspired by that first Mr. Money Mustache event that we went to in May of 2016. So shortly after that, I started doing my own personal research to try to get smarter on all of this stuff myself. But what I was not finding is a single resource that actually escorts you through all of the concepts that you stumble upon naturally while you're Googling this or listening to that blog or listening to that podcast or reading that blog. But there was nothing that actually like solidified a logical step by step. Here are the things that you should be aware of as you go through and see what you can apply to your own situation on your way to financial independence. So Stephen and I developed a framework, and that became Fiology. So it turned out, I think there was like 48 or something, like, oh, I might as well make it 52 to make it an even year. So we added a few, and then it spans from what is financial independence to the big three. It talks about a little bit of taxes, some Social Security stuff. So all of those things that you would naturally find on your own through search engines, we try to put it in a framework that makes it the concepts flow logically from one to the next, and you can build on that earlier knowledge as you're actively implementing that information in your own personal finance journey.
Well, that's awesome, because there's not only one aspect of Fiology. If you go to the website, I noticed that you have a coaches aspect and a stories aspect. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's not just an email string that people get. They've got to avail themselves of the website.
Yeah, so if somebody puts their email in, they will get the lesson every Tuesday for 1 year. And that just goes step by step, and it basically just links, because a little paragraph, and then links back to the website for that bigger lesson for that topic. Other aspects of the website include a coaches page. Now, I don't get paid, and I'm not in the business of taking a cut of other coaches' pay or anything like that. But these coaches that ask to be on the site, or I have asked to be profiled on the site, agree to, honestly, it's been a while since I've looked at that page, but they agree to act in their client's best interest, not sell products for which they get a commission, and a few other things that make them different, or at least appear different, to my understanding, than the majority of some of the financial advisors that are out there. So maybe the fact that they're on Fiology, someone who visits that knows that they might adhere to a little bit more cordial, more transparent way of doing business. I don't get paid for anything that they list all free, and so that's what that is. As far as other aspects of the site, there is a FI community section where people have shared their stories in the past. So there might be 20 or 30 stories of people just sharing their own journey, their own challenges. And then there's the blog portion, which is something I've actually kind of put more effort in over the last year and a half. And there's a good number of general topics, more blog type, not necessarily in the lessons format there. So there's plenty of things on the site to explore. And I will admit that I have not been putting a whole lot of effort into the site over the last 6 months, because the majority of my effort has now been shifted over to the podcast. So that does take a lot of effort, especially when you do everything on your own, like a lot of time. But I would like to get back and continuously update that site and make sure that it stays relevant for everybody who is visiting it.
Yeah. Speaking of the podcast, tell us a little bit about that. What's the name of it?
Sure. The podcast, I started in January. It was originally meant to be three co-hosts, and for various reasons, it ended up being just me. I guess they didn't like me very much. No, that wasn't really the case. At least I don't think it is. But
no,
yeah.
No one would not like you.
So
it's better with just you anyway.
So 6 months has gone by so far. I've told myself I'm going to give it 50 episodes and just see how it goes. But I have, over the last few years, developed some skill sets for audio engineering, video production, video editing. And so really I'm doing all of this on my own. And as you know, running a podcast takes a lot of effort and time, tedious work. So I don't know how long I'm going to do it, but I'm going to tough it out, and I'm enjoying it right now. And I think I'm improving in my skill sets over time. So that's one of my personal objectives. But for those who are listening who don't really care about my own personal objectives and just want to know what the podcast's about, it's called Forget About Money, the Forget About Money podcast. It has a YouTube first approach, but it's also available on all of the podcast platforms. The video goes out on Wednesdays, and the audio goes out on the podcast platforms on Friday. And so far, so good. It seems it's growing gradually, and every once in a while you get a good jolt, and I don't know why. It's all about that Google algorithm. But yeah, I invite everybody to listen to it if they're interested in hearing more. Like, you've got a great podcast, and there are many other great podcasts out there too. So the more information we can get out there, the better. And hopefully the listeners can find some kind of information that they can apply to their own situation and improve their lot in life.
Well, I've listened to it myself, and as Jackie mentioned before, I think the J.L. Collins, Paul Merriman head-to-head is a leader, because they had met for the first time in that podcast. That shows you what kind of a connector you are. I mean, you have a breadth of knowledge, a breadth of connections, and then you bring it together and distill it down into your podcast, and I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
Let's turn back to Stephen for a moment, because I want to get to a project that is sort of the potential future of FI. There's a capital of FI in Longmont, Colorado that sort of happened organically. But you're doing something with a project called Eagle that is a co-housing project in Georgia. Tell us what it is, why you started this, and where do you stand with it, and how are you going about it now? Where does it stand?
All right. So yes, hopefully I look at it the way you just said it. I like a future thing. It's like a natural progression. We'll see if it pans out that way, but that's how I look at it, and why I'm pursuing it in the first place. So David and I both have referenced the fact that we attended a Camp Mustache back in 2016. During that Camp Mustache, they had a breakout session that we attended, and I don't know if you've had her on the show. If you haven't had her, I'd highly recommend having her on your show. But a woman named Marla Tainer hosted that breakout session where she brought up the concept of co-housing. So it's basically, I know that there are like more wordy ways to kind of sell this, and I apologize in advance. I've been accused of being a bad salesperson, so I don't use a lot of flowery language. But basically, I look at it as just like an efficient neighborhood where neighbors want to be neighbors. And over time, with, not to sound like an old person, but like we get a lot of our dopamine hits, our enjoyment or whatever through social media, through our phones and things like that. But we all know deep down that's not as fulfilling as it should be. And I think we're kind of moving away from the options to have to live an analog life. So that, coupled with the fact that like, what now after I've reached financial independence, after I've early retired, if I stay where I am, maybe all my neighbors are working, all my friends are still working, so I'm just by myself and I feel disconnected. Now I'm just going to go back to work. So what it gives to me, it seems like something like a co-housing community is a natural progression for people who reach early retirement. It's like, we all know about retirement communities. I think Villages is a huge one in Florida, and there's others. But so this would be like an early retirement community, or fire community. So to me, I was introduced to the idea of co-housing in that 2016 breakout session at Camp Mustache. And then I came home. I was excited about the idea, purchased a few books, did a little bit of reading. I was like, that would be really cool to be able to bring a co-housing community to Georgia, to my hometown. And so coincidentally, maybe David, 6-7 months later, some guy who owned 18 houses in a neighborhood here in town put all of his houses up for sale at once. And so it was like, oh, this guy's selling a whole bunch of houses. This would be a great jump start to to a co-housing community. And so we kind of went down that road with him, couldn't negotiate terms. He still owns all those 18 houses now, 6-7 years later. But what basically at that point, I started knocking on doors in the same neighborhood, connecting with owners, and people in the FI community have been purchasing these homes for the ultimate goal of having this co-housing or early retirement community, fire community. And which is great, because early on it was their support that made me keep going. I help out right now. They're all just rental properties. The tenants there don't know about the fact that this is ultimately, their house is ideally going to be part of a co-housing community. But the people who have purchased these houses in support of the co-housing community are using them as rental properties, and they have good, solid income. They're very good investments. It's an older neighborhood, smaller houses. But they know at some point which that point is now actually, I've always said when we get to 20 to 25 houses under our belt, we'll start seeing if there's interest for people to move in. And there are a lot of people interested in this. Few people have, it's a crazy idea, right? Like, oh yeah, we're going to create a community. We can pick our neighbors. We might be 35 to 55 or whatever, maybe even older. But what does life look like when you're not spending all your days at a 9-to-5 job? You got to do something. You hang out with your friends, walk around the block, go swimming, work in the garden, just whatever. But to me, all that is exciting to think about, but it doesn't happen without a concentrated group of people in one area. Instead of having all of us one-offed all over the country, we can kind of gather people and see what kind of difference we can make in our neighborhood, in our city, and even in our own lives, our own happiness levels, being more connected that way. I know that, again, that was a long answer. Hopefully people stayed awake.
So where's this located, Stephen?
It's located in Warner Robins, Georgia, which is right in the middle of the state of Georgia. It's about an hour and a half south of Atlanta, 2 hours west of Savannah. If you looked at the state of Georgia and point your finger right in the middle, we're right there.
Yeah, I'm a Georgia girl too, from Augusta, Georgia. So Bill, I think when we go to FinCon in Atlanta, we need to do a tour of these Warner Robins property, and I say party in Warner Robins.
Well, that would be interesting, actually. That's a good idea. We'll definitely have a Catching Up to FI meetup. And I think it's a couple hours south of Atlanta, so if we tack on an extra day, we could do it. One thing that's interesting to me about this, and I've just been reminded of this, is you're creating kind of a blue zone. We hear about blue zones being places where community is a huge aspect of living longer in life. sort of a healthy, active lifestyle. It may not be just for fire. I mean, I see a community here in Knoxville that's an over 55 community where they're retiring and they don't want to be just living alone in their houses. And it's hard to, just like what CampFIs do, it's hard to make new friends, say, if you move to an area and retire. So what you're doing, I think, is very important as a lifestyle template for not just fire or FI people, but something we should see more of in our living styles, right?
Right. The co-housing actually it started like in Denmark, I think, and then there was a couple people who went there, researched it in the late 70s, maybe early 80s, came back here, and they have been popularizing it. So co-housing isn't something that is just FI. It's just fire. It's people working and things like that. I mean, people who are just wanting to be more connected and live normal lives, but just be more connected with their neighbors than is typical nowadays. So the downside to typical co-housing, if you go to cohousing.org, you can see if any of your listeners might have co-housing communities in their own city or very nearby. If they're interested in this type of living, I'd say check out their database, find something near you, go take a tour and see. What I was going to say is the downside of these things is they typically are very expensive. In my opinion, they're very expensive. Now, I live in a low cost of living area. Houses here, even though they've gone up over the last few years, I mean, it's still relatively cheap compared to national levels. So those places are very expensive for me. And it's not like FI. So FI is about, to me, it's about efficiency. If you're trying to get ahead, you're not overspending on the box that you sleep in, kind of thing. So one of the things about this co-housing community here is it's probably going to be the least expensive co-housing community in the country, I would imagine. The houses are going to run between 1 and 110 probably. They're older, so you're probably going to fix them up a little bit. But I mean, you can get a nice little house for 150 or much less, depending on how you want to fix it up. And so to me, that's great. So even if you're not financially independent and you're just looking, maybe you asked me earlier, kind of where does it stand now? So where it stands now is there's this neighborhood that's like nicely blocked off. There's 99 houses in the neighborhood. All of them are not going to be part of the co-housing community right away, maybe not ever. We have currently 21 units, 21 houses. They're all single family homes, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, smaller footprints, kind of compact, close together. And we have 21 of them. One of them is going to be a community house, so basically we have 20 houses. So now we've started to reach out if this sounds like something that you're interested in. We've created a website. It's still in the works, but it's good enough. If you want, any of your listeners want to check it out, it's eaglecohousing.com. And there's a thing on there you can fill out a questionnaire. I can reach out to you and we can talk more. But where we're at now is we started kind of pushing this year, now that we have the 20 houses, to see if there's really any interest in it. And we have a couple from Virginia is going to move down in February. And another lady from Colorado is already planning on moving down next February as well. So those are our two first units. This house that I'm in right now, that you see on video, I am about a quarter mile away from it. So as it starts to populate with our people for the co-housing community, I'll eventually move in there too.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, as somebody mentioned to us in the chat, late starters often need to downsize. And as they move into retirement or needing to downsize, this sounds like a perfect option to accelerate your path to FI as a late starter. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. It's a way to accelerate your path to FI, but it's also, say you're living in a high cost of living area, but you have a pretty decent net worth, but because your expenses are so high, you're not FI. Well, you can geo arbitrage, which I'm sure your community has heard that term maybe once or twice. You can move to a low cost of living area where now you are financially independent. So that's what the couple in Virginia is doing. Like, they are close to FI now, but when they move down, they're going to be plenty FI. So yeah, it's a great way to reduce your expenses, not just with your housing, but like through sharing with community members. So we're not going to have where everybody's not even going to need a car. Like, you can borrow my car, like whatever, like who cares? We're all like a sharing thing. You can borrow my lawnmower, or I can borrow your lawnmower. So we can share. Everybody doesn't need one of everything. So there are also a lot of other savings involved. Say you have a young kid and You trust your neighbors and you have to go away for something and you need a babysitter. Like, there you go. There's just a great support system for a lot of non-financial benefits, but there also are financial benefits as well.
Yeah, it's like now you're taking the community builder literally. You're literally building this community. And it's hard to believe that you're still working. You've got CampFI, you've got the Eagle Cohousing. So you're getting it done. Now, one thing I did want to make sure that I mentioned was the whole single player FI. So you guys are both single, two handsome single guys here, right? And you've been through divorce, you're co-parenting. So how does that look different? Because I get asked that question a lot because many of the people in the FI community that I know, they're married to high income earners or something like that. But we've gone through the life's journey of being divorced, having kids to deal with after the divorce, and being single. I like to label it single player FI. So as a single individual, and maybe even as a single parent, how does that change? Like, do you feel like you have enough flexibility to move around? If you have kids, like when I had my kid, I definitely would not have been even thinking about moving around. Or is there any, and especially since both of you guys through your FI journey, you've been married and you've been single. So
yes.
Is that any different? How is that different? And there's obviously life after divorce, and I'm proof for that. You guys are proof of that.
Yeah, I would say we talk about everybody's personal finance journey as personal. Well, I would say even more so in a situation like this where you're divorced, if kids are involved, where do you live? What are the dynamics of the divorce? What are the financial dynamics of the divorce? What are the financial responsibilities of the parent to the child? Or so that's even more complicated than just maxing out your Roth and maxing out your TSP or your 401k. Like, it gets way more complicated. I would say for me, I can speak only for me, and I'm fairly familiar with Stevens, but I can't only speak for him. For me, I had a prenuptial agreement before my marriage. So I know a lot of people feel one way or another about that. I am very, very glad I had one. And I probably would not be able to be financially independent right now without it. And I would not have the time that I have with my son without it. So and I'm not trying to turn this conversation into a pro-prenuptial agreement conversation, because that's unique and everybody feels differently about that. For me, I am very, very grateful and thankful that I had one. Having said that, I have 50-50 custody of my son. So being single in San Diego with like every other week, with the time on my side of the ledger, especially not having a 9-to-5 job, I do fill that time up with leisurely activities, whether it be either dating someone or working on the podcast or just going to the gym a little bit more often. It's warming up here. I'll probably be going to the beach more often, taking advantage of being in San Diego. At least if you're gonna pay the sunshine tax, go enjoy it. So for me, being a single guy in San Diego is great, and being financially independent and single in San Diego is great too, because financial independence for me has been able to give me the opportunity to spend so much more time with my son than I know other fathers in particular get to spend with their children. So many times we think we only have our kids until we think we have our kids until they're 18. And actually I learned this at a CampFI. So Stephen, if you can remember this, we had a gentleman come and talk about prioritizing life and with their kids. And I'm getting a little off topic, but I want to mention it. And we think we have them till they're 18, but we really don't. We only have them till they're like 13, 14, and then they start naturally pushing themselves away from us, which is part of growing up. But it's a miscalculation most of us have. So when you frame it like that, then you really want to front load your time and impact on your children, assuming you're a good influence. And I believe that I am. So I'm able to do that. I would not be able to do that as well or as much if I had to go to a 9-to-5 every day. But life is good being single in San Diego. I love being a single, I don't love necessarily being a single dad, but I love the time that I have with my son.
How does it work for you, Stephen?
I mean, like I told you before, like until my divorce, I wasn't accumulating anything, barely. Maybe some forced home equity. And then whenever I didn't have a prenup, it wouldn't have made sense for me to have a prenup anyway, because I didn't really have a net worth going into my marriage. But I mean, we had wills and things like that, and we still do, and that's cool. But I am pro prenup, but I just didn't have one because there was no reason at the time. So I didn't really start my journey, my FI accumulation phase really, until after finding all of this, which was or finding the FI community, finding Mr. Money Mustache, finding the Early Retirement Extreme blog and book, Jacob Lundfisker, who was sort of like even pre Mr. Money Mustache days, like that's when I started my accumulation phase. So I really can't compare like the FI journey pre-divorce and post-divorce, because mine started after. But I will say that I didn't accumulate during my marriage. So maybe that's an answer right there. Yeah. So I was able to downsize and control my expenses a lot more when it was just me. And so that allowed me to accumulate. So yeah, I'm further behind than probably people watching this who've heard of CampFI or even met me at CampFI. Like, I don't talk about me. I don't talk about my finances because I just don't. This is probably the most I've talked about my finances on a podcast. This absolutely is the most I've even talked about my finances publicly. Most people don't ask, but they assume. So most people do assume I'm much further along, but that's fine. Like, I am good. I'm just like everybody else, just kind of balancing life, kids, money, paying the bills, while trying to keep myself happy with passion projects, very fulfilling things, is fun. How that impacts dating life. Oh man. After divorce, I dated a lot. It got exhausting, but I realized, like, hey, I got my mojo back. I'm good. I'm all right. And then after that, like, I meet a lot of people, a lot of very quality people through camps, and most of my social life is through the camps now. When I'm at home, I'm just so busy. I don't make time for like a local social life, barely any at all. So yeah, I don't date. I don't really feel like I have the bandwidth to date, but I'm open to it. If I ever met somebody and the chemistry was there, Jackie.
I was about to say, I see you looking. I don't see that. Look, I saw you winking at me before we hit the start button to record. Now, don't pretend.
Well, I mean, I don't know if people use CampFI as a love connection, but we could turn CUtFI into a dating site as well, because there are a lot of divorcees there, and we just got to start putting it out there. CatchingUpToFi.com. Find your match. Or CampFI.
And Bill, we have to mention that we did have the expert on prenups on the show, Aaron Thomas. What was the name of the book? I know it was a pink book, but he spoke at Economy about prenups, that it was a great thing. So he frames it in such a positive way that it's something that possibly can save your marriage. So I'm pro prenup. Bill, I think now you're pro prenup after we had Aaron on the show. And we just presented that Aaron presented that in a very unique way, because people are often referencing prenups as a negative thing, and it really is not. That's a legal document that should be helpful if the worst happens, but even if it doesn't, it could end up saving your marriage.
Well, that is an episode that's coming up in the next couple of weeks, and his view on it is very interesting. I mean, it's actually a message of love to your partner. Yeah. It helps clear the air on your finances, so you go in eyes wide open, transparent. And a lot of times these days, people have assets. They're getting married later, so they have assets going into a marriage, and you want to be fair. It's about being fair. And, I am a fan of prenups. My wife wants a postnup, so go figure.
Yeah. So we're giving you a big thumbs up, David, for the prenup thing. Good job.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot of topics today, and there's been a lot of value in this for our late starters. And in homage to our late starters, I want to turn to both of you and ask you for any top 1, 2, or 3 tips you might have for an audience like ours. David, why don't you go first?
Sure. First, I would say, don't compare yourself to the 25-year-old who's starting their journey. There's no benefit in that whatsoever, other than maybe educating yourselves on factors that affect whether or not you'll be successful in your investing. But you still have time. The average lifespan for a male is 73 and a half, and the average lifespan for a woman is 79 or close to 80 years. So if you're 50, you still have considerable time. Yes, there are certain things that you don't have that the younger person does have. It might be energy, it might be time, it might be other things, but you do have experience. You probably better give yourself some grace, but definitely no doubt about it, you got to get on it, but give yourself some grace and don't compare yourself. Compare yourself to you yesterday. And also, the second thing I would say is don't necessarily focus on all the money. You may not by our definition of financial independence of 4x, 25x, 4% rule, all that, you might not reach it. And that's not the worst thing that can happen. I think the worst thing that can happen is if you continue to despair, continue to focus on negative aspects of not achieving something that you, especially like comparing yourself to the Joneses or that younger person, focus on things like health, longevity, your passion projects. That's still life. Money is just one aspect of this. So make sure you're balancing the different aspects of an overall healthy life, not just the money aspects. Weigh things appropriately. And I'd say probably for the third thing, you might have assets that you might just need to be more open-minded about considering. Many older people, they got locked into the American dream being a home. So a lot of older people actually do have, whether they inherited it or they built up the equity themselves, have a lot of equity in their home, a lot of value in their home. Now, I am not a huge proponent of reverse mortgages for a number of reasons. However, there are ways, I am a proponent of using your asset value to achieve whatever objective that you're trying for. So I do know of one person who had a paid off home. They did not do a reverse mortgage, but they did do a cash out refi. And so they were able, and what they did then, and this is now, I understand, rates are what they are now. So when they were more ideal, this person took out a cash out refi and then just started paying off their mortgage again. But they put that money in investments. So look at what you do have and how you can maybe rearrange or reallocate to help meet some of the objectives that you still have. So you might, instead of thinking that you're going to leave a lot of money to your children or a lot of value or a home to your children, you need living expenses for the rest of your life so you're not a burden to your children. Think of it maybe like that. And then things are where they are. Really understand where you are and what you can do to talk with smart people and figure out a way forward. But financial independence, and for the sake of reaching financial independence, should not be the goal.
Okay, great thoughts. Now, Stephen, your final thoughts for late starters.
Sleep well, surround yourself with positive people, and give yourself a break every now and then. Those are my three.
Well, you can do all of that at CampFI. You can sleep well, surround yourself with positive people, and it's a break. So that's a great way to close, I think, guys. Jackie, do you have any final thoughts before we let these guys go and change the world?
Yeah, I do. Just real quick, I just wanted to say it was an honor highlighting both of you, because I know you guys love to push other people in the spotlight and you're happy with the behind the scenes. But wasn't it a lot of fun to kind of get to know these guys a little bit better? I think everyone in the FI community knows them and has consumed their content and their creations. And it's just so cool to really dive into their story, their background. A lot of this I had no idea, so I was very excited about it, and it was just a lot of fun highlighting you guys. So thank you for joining us on Catching Up to FI.
Well, I completely agree. And so thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show. Your contributions are incredible. We owe you a debt of gratitude for your contributions to the FI community and beyond. The synergy of your efforts as twins with similar mindsets and different strengths is incredibly inspiring to us. We wish you both continued success in your robust lives, pre and post FI. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. So our social media is Diana Falk, our editor, Fritz Bassard, and show notes are done by Sarah von Sternberg. We love them and they keep us going.
Yeah, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community and we hope you love us back. If you want to support the show and what we're doing, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to virtually say thank you if you get value from our content. The link is in the show notes, or you can head over to our website at catchinguptofy.com and click on the Support the Podcast tab at the top right. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
While we are financial educators, and I'm a financial professional that loves to teach, our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to Phi.